Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Coldwater, and I've spent 17 years working as a ranger in Alaska's backcountry. People ask me all the time if I've ever seen anything strange out there in the wilderness. Until March of 1976, I would have laughed and told them no. I would have said the only things to fear in Denali are the cold, the animals, and your own stupid mistakes. I was wrong. My grandmother used to tell me stories when I was a kid. She was Athabascan, born and raised in these mountains, and she knew things the White Rangers never believed. She talked about the Tornersuk ice spirits that walked during the darkest winter nights, looking for warmth, looking for souls. My brother Danny loved those stories. He'd sit by the fire with his eyes wide, begging for more. Danny died when I was 23. We were climbing the Ruth Glacier together, and he fell through a snow bridge into a crevasse. By the time I got down to him, hypothermia had already set in. He was talking, but his words didn't make sense. He kept saying he saw people made of ice, reaching for him, kept saying they wanted to take him somewhere cold. I told myself it was just his brain shutting down. That's what happens when you freeze. Your mind plays tricks on you. You see things that aren't there. You believe things that can't be real. For 17 years, I believed that. I specialized in winter survival training and avalanche rescue. I've pulled 47 people out of situations that should have killed them. I know how to read weather patterns, how to spot dangerous ice, how to keep people alive when the temperature hits 60 below zero. I'm good at my job because I don't panic and I don't believe in ghost stories. The research team arrived at Wonder Lake Station on February 28, 1976. 5 scientists from the University of Alaska studying climate patterns and aurora activity. Dr. Sarah Chen was the lead, a small woman with sharp eyes who didn't seem bothered by the cold at all. Her team consisted of 2 meteorologists, a geologist, and a graduate student named Marcus, who looked too young to be out here. We'll be monitoring temperature fluctuations during the aurora events, Dr. Chen explained, spreading maps across my desk. The Athabascan elders mentioned unusual cold spots in this region. We want to see if there's a scientific explanation. I looked at where her finger pointed on the map. The northern edge of the Wonder Lake sector, about 15 miles into the backcountry. Even in March, that area stayed dark for most of the day. We were still 3 weeks away from the sun, returning for good. That's rough territory, I said, and we've got aurora storms forecasted. Radio communication goes out when they hit. That's exactly when we need to be there, she said, smiling. Don't worry, Ranger Coldwater. We're prepared. I gave them the standard speech about winter survival. Told them about checking in every 12 hours, about the emergency shelters, about what to do if the weather turned. Marcus wrote everything down in a little notebook, his hand shaking slightly. Not from fear, just from cold. The kid wasn't built for Alaska. They headed out on March 2nd, just after dawn. The sky was deep purple, stars still visible overhead. I watched their snowmobiles disappear into the white distance, their lights bouncing across the tundra. The aurora was already starting to show green ribbons dancing across the northern horizon. My radio crackled at 8 p.m. Dr. Chen's voice came through clear and professional. Wonder Lake Base, this is Research Team 1. We've reached the monitoring site and set up camp. Weather holding steady at -38. All equipment functioning normally. Copy that, I said. Stay warm out there. Will do. Chen out. That was the last normal transmission I ever received from them. At 8 a.m. the next morning, they missed their check-in. I waited 30 minutes, then tried raising them on the radio. Nothing but static. The aurora had intensified overnight, brilliant green and purple curtains that filled the entire sky, even though it was technically daytime. That happens sometimes in deep winter. The aurora doesn't care about the sun. By noon, I was loading my emergency pack. Something felt wrong. I've learned to trust that feeling over the years. It's kept me alive more times than I can count. The temperature had dropped to -40 by the time I headed out. My breath froze instantly, creating tiny crystals that caught the aurora light. The snowmobile's engine sounded too loud in the silence. That's the thing about extreme cold, it kills sound. Everything feels muffled, like the world is holding its breath. I reached their camp at 4 p.m. The aurora was so bright I didn't need my headlamp. The shelter was intact. Their snowmobiles were parked in a neat row. The equipment was still running, weather monitors beeping softly. And on the camp table, I found 5 mugs of coffee, still steaming. In -40-degree weather, with no heat source nearby, the coffee was hot enough to burn my hand when I touched the ceramic. That was when I realized my grandmother's stories might not have been stories at all. I stood in that empty camp for 5 minutes, just staring at those steaming mugs. My brain kept trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe they'd just stepped away. Maybe they'd gone to check on some equipment. Maybe. But the coffee was times hot, asterisk. Not lukewarm, not cooling down. Hot enough to brew, like someone had just poured it seconds ago. I keyed my radio. Wonder Lake Base, this is Coldwater. I've reached the research site. The camp is intact, but the team is not present. Requesting backup. Static answered me. The aurora overhead had intensified, sheets of green light rippling like a living thing. I'd seen plenty of auroras before, but never like this. Never during the day. Never this bright. I checked inside the shelter tent. 5 sleeping bags laid out neatly. Personal items organized on a makeshift shelf. Dr. Chen's reading glasses, Marcus's notebook, someone's family photos. Nothing disturbed, nothing missing, except 5 people. I circled the camp perimeter, looking for tracks. The snow here was fresh from last night's light dusting, perfect for reading sign. I found their boot prints leading to and from the shelter, to and from the equipment stations. Normal patterns of movement, but at the northern edge of camp, I found something else. Footprints. Human-shaped, human-sized. They appeared in the middle of a pristine patch of snow, with no trail leading to them, just there. Like someone had materialized out of empty air and started walking. The prints headed north, toward the glacier fields. I knelt down to examine them closer, and that's when I noticed something wrong. The prints had no depth. They were there. I could see the shape clearly, the outline of a boot sole, even individual tread marks. But they hadn't compressed the snow. It was like looking at a photograph of footprints rather than real ones. My breath caught, not from cold this time. I followed the impossible tracks. They led away from camp in a straight line, never deviating, never showing the natural wobble of human walking. After about 50 yards, they were joined by more prints. Lots more. A dozen sets at least. All appearing from nowhere. All heading in the same direction. Then I found the first set of real tracks. Dr. Chen's boots, I recognized the tread pattern from camp. She was running. The prints were far apart, deep, showing panic. Behind her, those weightless ghost prints followed, matching her pace exactly. The real tracks stopped at the edge of a pressure ridge. Beyond that, only the impossible prints continued, marching in perfect formation toward the glaciers. I was breathing hard now, and not from exertion. Each breath burned my lungs, but I barely noticed. I stood on that pressure ridge and looked north. And for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something moving in the distance. Figures. Translucent and shifting, human-shaped, but wrong somehow. I blinked, and they were gone. "Get it together, Thomas," I said out loud. My voice sounded dead in the cold air, absorbed by the snow before it could echo. Altitude sickness, stress, nothing else. But my hand was shaking as I reached for my radio again. Still nothing but static. The aurora pulsed overhead, brighter now, and the temperature gauge on my pack read -42. It had dropped 4 degrees in the 20 minutes since I'd arrived at camp. I made a decision. I would follow the tracks as far as I could before dark, mark my position, then return to camp and wait for backup. Standard search protocol. Nothing crazy. Nothing that would make me sound insane when I filed my report. The tracks led me into the glacier fields, a maze of ice formations, pressure ridges, and crevasses that could swallow a person whole. I'd been through here before, knew the safe routes, but something felt different now. The ice seemed darker somehow, more blue than white. And it was quiet. Too quiet. No wind, no animal sounds, just my breathing and the crunch of my snowshoes on the hard-packed snow. That's when I heard the voice. "Thomas." I froze. It was Danny's voice. My brother's voice. Clear as day, calling my name. "Thomas, I'm cold. Please help me." It came from my left, from inside a deep crevasse. I turned slowly, my heart hammering. I knew times that Danny had been dead for 19 years. I'd watched them lower his body into the ground. This wasn't possible. "Please," the voice said again. "It's so cold down here. I can't feel my hands anymore." I walked to the edge of the crevasse. It dropped away into blue-black darkness, ice walls gleaming in the aurora light. Nothing down there but shadows and death. "Thomas, why won't you help me?" My throat was tight. "You're not Danny," I managed to say. "He's dead." Silence for a moment. Then laughter high and cold and wrong. It echoed up from the crevasse, bouncing off ice walls, multiplying until it sounded like a dozen voices laughing at once. The temperature dropped again. My gauge showed -45 now, and it was still falling. I could feel it in my bones, a cold that went deeper than weather should go. I backed away from the crevasse, turned, and started walking quickly back the way I'd come. But the glacier field looked different now. The ice formations had changed position. The route I'd taken was gone, replaced by a confusing maze of dead ends and steep walls. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun wildly, rotating in complete circles, unable to find north. My GPS showed coordinates that made no sense, numbers that placed me in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. "Okay," I said to myself. "Okay, this is fine. Just need to backtrack. Follow my own prints." I looked down. My tracks were gone. The snow behind me was smooth and untouched, like I'd never walked there at all. That's when I heard the voices, not Danny this time. Dr. Chen, Marcus, the others. All of them calling for help, their voices coming from different directions, overlapping, pleading. "Ranger Coldwater, we're lost. It's so cold, please help us. They're here, they're all around us. Well, 2020, make them stop touching us." I ran. I don't remember making the decision, my body just moved, pure survival instinct taking over. I ran through the ice maze, jumping over small crevasses, sliding down slopes, my breath coming in ragged gasps that froze before they left my mouth. And behind me, I heard footsteps. Lots of them. Crunching through snow, moving fast, keeping pace with me no matter how hard I pushed. I risked a glance back. The aurora light revealed them clearly for the first time. Dozens of figures, human-shaped, but made of ice and mist. I could see through them, see the glacier beyond their translucent bodies, but they were solid enough to leave those weightless tracks in the snow. They moved in perfect unison, like a school of fish, their forms constantly shifting, now solid ice, now vapor, now something in between. And they were reaching for me with fingers that looked like icicles. I put my head down and ran faster. I don't know how long I ran. Time felt wrong, stretched out and compressed at the same time. The aurora overhead was pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat, and the cold had gone beyond pain into something else, a burning sensation that felt like my skin was on fire. I stumbled and fell hard, skidding across ice. My pack came loose and tumbled away. When I looked up, I'd somehow made it back to the research camp. Impossible. I'd been running away from camp, deeper into the glaciers. There was no way I could have circled back without realizing it. But there was the shelter tent. There were the snowmobiles. There were those 5 mugs of coffee, still steaming in the -45-degree cold. I crawled toward the shelter, my legs shaking. Behind me, I could hear those footsteps getting closer, and underneath them, whispers in a language I didn't understand. My grandmother had spoken some Athabascan, taught me a few words, but this was older, harsher, words that hurt to hear. I grabbed the tent flap and pulled myself inside, zipping it shut behind me, like fabric could stop whatever was out there. For a moment, silence, just my ragged breathing and the hammer of my pulse in my ears. Then the temperature inside the tent dropped. Not gradually all at once, like someone had opened a freezer door. My breath came out in thick white clouds. Frost started forming on the interior walls, spreading in geometric patterns that looked almost deliberate. Almost like writing. The tent wall bulged inward. Something was pressing against it from outside, hard enough to make the fabric stretch. I could see the shape of a hand, too many fingers, too long, the tips ending in points. "Go away," I said. My voice cracked. "Leave me alone." The hand withdrew. The tent wall went still. Then every wall started bulging at once. Dozens of hands, pressing, pushing, searching for a way in. The tent fabric was rated for extreme weather, reinforced and strong, but I watched it start to tear. Small holes appearing, spreading, the edges crystallizing with ice. A finger pushed through one of the holes. It was made of ice, perfectly clear, like blown glass, but moving like flesh. The fingertip touched my jacket sleeve, and I felt cold shoot through the fabric, through my shirt, straight into my skin. My arm went numb instantly. I jerked away and grabbed my emergency flare gun from my pack. My numb hand barely had strength to grip it, but I managed to aim at the tent wall and fire. The flare exploded in brilliant red light. The tent caught fire immediately, cheap fabric going up like paper. I dove out through the entrance, rolling in the snow to put out the flames on my jacket. When I looked back, the ice figures were there. At least 30 of them, standing in a semicircle around the burning tent. The firelight passed through their bodies, making them glow from within like lanterns. Beautiful and terrible at the same time. They didn't come closer. The fire seemed to bother them, keep them at bay. But they didn't leave either. They just stood there, watching, waiting. One of them stepped forward. It was almost human-looking, a woman's shape, with long hair made of frost and eyes like chips of glacier ice. When she opened her mouth, Dr. Chen's voice came out. "Help us, Ranger Coldwater. We're so cold, we can't find our way back." "Where are they?" I demanded. "What did you do with the research team?" The figure tilted its head, a gesture so human it made my skin crawl. "They're here. They're with us. They'll always be with us." Another figure stepped forward, this one male-shaped, speaking with Marcus's voice. "It doesn't hurt after a while. The cold becomes warm. Everything becomes warm, you'll see. You just have to let us touch you," said a third figure in a child's voice that I didn't recognize. "Let us in, let us share your heat." The burning tent collapsed, flames dying down to embers. The ice figures took a step forward. I backed away, pulling out my radio. Maybe, if the aurora cleared for just a moment, if I could get through to base. "Wonder Lake Base, this is Coldwater. I need immediate extraction. The research team is static, but underneath it, whispers." The same voices as the figures, dozens of them, all talking at once through my radio speaker. Asterisk, join us, Thomas. Asterisk, asterisk, the cold is beautiful here. Asterisk, asterisk, your brother is waiting. Asterisk, asterisk, we're all waiting. Asterisk. I threw the radio down and ran again. The snowmobiles, if I could reach one, started up, get out of here. But when I got to where they were parked, the engines were encased in solid ice, not frost, not frozen fuel. Each entire engine had been transformed into a single block of clear ice, like they'd been dipped in glass. I could see the pistons, the spark plugs, everything perfectly preserved inside. The ice figures were moving closer now, forming a complete circle around me. I was trapped with nowhere to go. That's when I remembered what my grandmother used to say. Fire keeps them away. Not just any fire. Sacred fire. The old kind, made the traditional way. I dropped to my knees and started digging through my pack with numb fingers. I always carried a fire kit, standard ranger equipment, waterproof matches, tinder, a small container of pitch, but I also carried something else, something I'd added to my kit after Danny died. A leather pouch my grandmother had given me, filled with dried herbs and oils she said were protection against the tornarsuk. I'd carried it for 19 years without ever believing I'd need it. My fingers barely worked, numb from cold and fear. The ice figures were close now, close enough that I could feel the supernatural cold radiating from their bodies, a cold that had nothing to do with weather. I got the tinder arranged, added the herbs from my grandmother's pouch. They smelled like sage and something else, something sharp and ancient. My first match broke. Second one wouldn't light. Third, the match flared. I cupped it with my hands, brought it to the tinder. The fire caught, and the herbs started to smoke. The ice figures screamed. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It was something deeper, something felt in bones and teeth. The aurora overhead went wild, colors I'd never seen before, pulsing so bright it hurt to look at. The figures stumbled back, their forms losing cohesion, becoming mist and then reforming, becoming ice and then melting. I fed the fire everything. I had more tinder, pieces of my pack, my spare gloves. The flames grew higher, the smoke thicker. The herbs crackled and sparked. "Go back, I said, my voice stronger now. Go back to wherever you came from. You can't have me, you can't have anyone else. The woman-shaped figure that spoke with Dr. Chen's voice reached toward me one last time. They're already ours, Thomas. We took them hours ago. Their warmth, their souls, everything. Where are their bodies? I demanded. She smiled, or her face did something like smiling. Come see. She pointed north, toward the heart of the glacier fields. Then she and all the others dissipated like smoke, leaving only their footprints in the snow. I kept the fire burning until dawn, or what passed for dawn in the Arctic winter. The sky lightened from black to deep purple, and the aurora finally faded. The temperature stayed at -45, but at least it stopped dropping. I wrapped myself in my emergency blanket and sat as close to the flames as I dared, feeding it with anything that would burn. My mind kept replaying what the ice woman had said. Asterisk, they're already ours. We took them hours ago. Asterisk, but they'd just disappeared yesterday, less than 24 hours. How could? Then I remembered the time distortion. How my watch showed only an hour had passed when it felt like I'd been running for 3. How the sun position seemed wrong. How everything felt stretched and compressed at the same time. How long had I really been out here? When the sky was light enough to see clearly, I gathered what was left of my supplies and started walking north. The ice figures had pointed that way. If the research team was out there, if there was even the smallest chance they were still alive, I had to look. I followed the glacier field until I reached a massive ice cave, the entrance yawning like a mouth. The ice here was different, darker, with veins of black running through it like frozen blood vessels. Wrong. Everything about it felt wrong. But I saw footprints leading inside. Real ones this time, with depth and weight. Dr. Chen's boots, Marcus's, the others. I lit a road flare and entered the cave. The walls were smooth, almost carved, not by water or wind, by something else. The black veins in the ice pulsed slightly, like they were alive. My breath echoed in the narrow passage, and with each step, the temperature dropped another degree. The tunnel opened into a large chamber. The flare light reflected off ice walls, multiplying, filling the space with red light. That's where I found them. The research team stood in the center of the chamber, arranged in a circle, holding hands. They looked peaceful. Their eyes were open but unseeing, and their skin had taken on a translucent quality, like they were slowly turning to ice from the inside out. Frost covered their hair, their eyebrows, their eyelashes. Dr. Chen, I called out. Can you hear me? Her head turned toward me slowly. Her mouth moved. So warm, she whispered. Finally warm. I approached carefully, the flare held out in front of me. I'm going to get you out of here, all of you. Just hold on. But when I touched Dr. Chen's shoulder, my hand went right through her. She wasn't solid, not anymore. Just an image, a projection, a ghost. Oh no, I breathed. No, no, no. They're not here, a voice said behind me. Danny's voice. Not really. Their bodies are with us. Their warmth is with us. These are just echoes. I spun around. The ice figures had returned, filling the chamber, blocking the exit. But the one in front was different. It looked exactly like my brother. Same face, same build, same scar on his chin from when he fell off his bike as a kid. Danny? Hello, Tommy. That was his nickname for me. Nobody else ever called me that. I've been waiting. Waiting so long in the cold. You're not my brother. I am, the figure said, and it sounded hurt. I've been here since the day I died. They all stay here, everyone who ever froze to death in these mountains. We're trapped in the cold, Tommy. Trapped forever. Unless what? Unless we find warmth, living warmth, body heat, soul heat. The Danny figure moved closer. It doesn't last long. A day, maybe 2. Then we're cold again. So we need more. We always need more. I looked at the research team, at what was left of them. You killed them. We set them free, another figure said. This one shaped like a young woman, free from cold, free from pain. They're warm now. They'll be warm forever. That's not freedom, I said. That's death. What's the difference? The Danny figure asked. You've spent 17 years out here, Tommy, running from what happened to me, running from the guilt. Don't you want to stop running? Don't you want to be warm? He reached for me, and I could see the child he used to be in his face. My little brother, the kid who used to follow me everywhere, who trusted me completely, who died because I wasn't careful enough to check the ice before we crossed. For a moment, just a moment, I wanted to take his hand. Then I saw the hunger in his eyes, the emptiness. This wasn't Danny. This was something wearing his shape, using his voice, trying to trick me the same way they'd tricked the research team. "No," I said. I pulled out my grandmother's leather pouch, tore it open, and threw the remaining herbs into my flare. The flame turned blue-white, intense and hot. The ice figures screamed again, their forms wavering. I grabbed a second flare from my belt, lit it from the first, and threw it at the chamber wall. The ice caught fire, impossible but real, burning with blue flame that spread across the walls like liquid. The Danny figure reached for me. "Tommy, please. My brother is dead," I said. "And I'm done running." I pulled out every flare I had, 6 total, lit them all, and threw them in different directions. The entire chamber erupted in flame. Impossible fire that burned ice, fire that felt ancient and right. The ice figures scattered, shrieking. I ran through them, toward the exit tunnel, the heat of the burning chamber at my back. Behind me, I heard them wailing, felt them reaching, but the fire kept them away. I burst out of the cave and kept running. Behind me, the entire glacier field was glowing with blue-white fire, ice melting, steam rising in massive columns that reached the sky. The aurora returned, brighter than ever, fighting against the firelight. I ran until I reached the research camp. The backup team I'd called for had finally arrived, 3 rangers and a helicopter. They were searching the camp, calling for me on the radio I'd thrown away. "Cold water," the lead ranger shouted when he saw me. "Jesus, man, we've been looking for you for 3 days. 3 days? I stopped, gasping. "I've only been gone since yesterday." "It's March 5th, he said, looking at me like I was crazy. "You radioed in on March 2nd. Where the hell have you been?" I looked back at the glacier fields. The blue fire was gone. Everything looked normal, pristine white snow, ordinary ice formations, no sign of anything wrong. "The research team," I managed to say. "Did you find them?" The ranger's face went grim. "We found something. You need to see this." They'd found the bodies 2 miles north of camp, in a crevasse. All 5 members of the research team, arranged in a circle, holding hands, perfectly preserved by the cold. The official cause of death was hypothermia. But I knew better. I gave my report to the Park Service. Told them about the unusual weather, the equipment failures, the aurora storms. Left out the ice figures, the voices, the supernatural cold. I valued my job, and I valued my reputation more. Dr. Chen's family sent me a thank you card for finding them. Marcus's mother called me, crying, saying at least now they had closure. I didn't tell them that their loved ones' last moments were spent giving their warmth, their life, heat, their very souls to things made of ice and hunger. I kept working as a ranger, kept doing winter rescues, kept training new recruits in survival techniques, but I added something to my standard equipment list, something I made every ranger carry, a leather pouch filled with sage, cedar, and oils blessed by Athabascan elders. Traditional fire starter, I called it. Good luck charm. Most of them laughed. Carried it anyway. 3 of them came back to me later, privately, and told me stories. Strange encounters during aurora storms, voices in the ice, footprints that appeared from nowhere. Each time, they'd used the pouch, built the sacred fire, and the things went away. I never saw the ice walkers again. But on clear winter nights, when the aurora is bright and the temperature drops below -40, I can feel them out there. Watching, waiting, hungry for warmth in a world of endless cold. I visit Danny's grave once a year, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I understand now that what spoke to me in the ice cave wasn't him, could never be him. The real Danny died 19 years ago, and whatever's left in those glaciers is just an echo, a shadow, a hunger that wears familiar faces. But I also visit my grandmother's grave, and I thank her. Thank her for believing in stories when everyone else called them superstition. Thank her for giving me protection I didn't know I'd need until it saved my life. The Park Service still sends teams to the Wonder Lake sector, still monitors the aurora activity, still tries to understand the strange temperature fluctuations in that region. I don't volunteer for those assignments anymore. Last winter, a new ranger asked me about the stories he'd heard about research teams that went missing, about things seen during aurora storms, about voices in the ice. Young kid, fresh out of training, full of confidence. I gave him a leather pouch, told him to carry it, always. "Why?" he asked, laughing. "You believe in ghost stories, Ranger Coldwater?" I looked him in the eye. "I believe in staying alive," I said. "And I believe some things are older and stranger than we'll ever understand. Things that live in the cold places, where the sun doesn't reach, where the aurora dances and reality gets thin." He stopped laughing. "Keep the fire burning," I told him. "The old way, the traditional way. And if you ever see footprints that don't have weight, if you ever hear voices calling from empty ice, if the cold ever feels like it's reaching inside you—" "What?" he whispered. "Run, run and don't look back. And whatever you do, don't let them touch you." He transferred to a different park 2 months later. I don't blame him. Me? I'm still here. 17 years has become 23, and I'll probably die out here eventually. But I'll die on my own terms, with fire in my veins and protection in my pocket. The ice walkers are patient. They've got nothing but time and cold and hunger. They'll wait decades if they have to. Wait for another research team, another lost hiker, another person who doesn't believe in old stories. But I'll be waiting too, teaching the new rangers, passing down my grandmother's wisdom, keeping the sacred fires burning. Because some things need to stay in the ice, some things need to stay in the dark. And some stories aren't stories at all. They're warnings. My name is Margaret Stormwind, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years in places most people wouldn't last 13 days. The Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge isn't like the parks you visit on vacation. Out here on Unimak Island, 300 miles from the mainland, there are no hiking trails or gift shops. Just volcanic rock, endless ocean, and fog so thick you could cut it with a knife. People ask me why I chose this life. The truth is, it chose me. After my Coast Guard vessel went down in the Bering Sea 15 years ago, after I spent 2 days clinging to wreckage and freezing water watching my crewmates slip away one by one, I couldn't go back to normal life. The ocean had tried to kill me, but it also saved me. A freak current pushed my piece of debris toward a fishing boat. The doctor said it was luck. I knew better, so I came out here to understand it. To monitor the seabirds that nest on these cliffs by the millions. To rescue sea lions tangled in fishing nets. To count orcas and track their migration patterns. I became an expert on everything that lives in these cold waters. But I never believed in monsters. Not the kind from stories, anyway. I'd heard the old Aleut legends, of course. The native people who lived here for thousands of years told stories about the Kalapalik creatures that hunted in the fog, that sang songs to lure people into the water, that dragged victims down to underwater caves. I respected those stories as culture, as history. But I'd seen what real ocean predators could do. Great white sharks, orcas hunting in packs. That was scary enough without inventing demons. That was before November 1983. Before the fog came that wouldn't leave. Before the Arctic dawn. The weather that month was wrong from the start. I've lived through plenty of North Pacific storms, 50-foot waves that shake the walls of my research station, winds that can knock a grown man off his feet. But this was different. The fog rolled in on November 3rd and just stayed. Not normal fog that comes and goes with the temperature changes. This fog sat heavy on the water like something alive, like something waiting. My station sits on the eastern edge of Unimak, a small building bolted to volcanic rock. Solar panels on the roof, a radio tower, reinforced windows that can handle hurricane winds. Inside, it's basic, a kitchen, a bedroom, a workspace with monitoring equipment. I've got sonar to track whale movements, radio to contact the mainland, weather instruments to log conditions. Every 6 weeks, a supply ship comes with food, fuel, and mail. I was due for a supply run in 3 weeks when the Arctic Dawn went missing. The Arctic Dawn was a research vessel out of Dutch Harbor, 40 feet long, steel hull, crew of 4. They were collecting water samples to study temperature changes in the Bering Sea. I'd worked with Captain Mike Chen before. Good guy, careful, 20 years on these waters, not the type to take stupid risks. The Coast Guard called me on November 8th. "Margaret, we've got a situation. The Arctic Dawn missed 2 check-in calls. Last known position was 15 miles north of you. Can you take your boat out and look?" I said yes, of course. That's part of the job out here. We look after each other because there's no one else to do it. The fog was so thick that morning, I almost didn't go. Visibility, maybe 20 feet. But Mike and his crew were out there somewhere, maybe in trouble, maybe hurt. I loaded emergency supplies into my boat, a 20-footer with a reliable engine, and headed north, following the GPS coordinates. The ocean was calm, too calm. No wind, no waves, just flat gray water disappearing into gray fog. The only sound was my engine, and the cry of gulls I couldn't see. I found the Arctic Dawn drifting 2 hours later. At first, I thought she'd just lost power. It happens. Engine failure, then you drift until someone finds you. But as I got closer, I saw the damage. The hull had holes in it, big ones. Jagged tears in the steel on both sides, right at the waterline. And the deck was empty. No crew, no life raft missing, no signs of fire or explosion. Just an empty boat, with her engine still running, drifting in circles through the fog. I tied up alongside and climbed aboard, calling out, "Mike? Anyone?" Nothing. Just the sound of my own voice swallowed by fog. The damage was wrong. I've seen what happens when boats hit rocks or get rammed by whales. This wasn't that. These tears in the hull were curved, like something had bitten down. And there were marks, deep scratches in the metal that looked almost like teeth marks. No, that was crazy. Nothing in these waters had teeth that could punch through a steel hull. I radioed the Coast Guard, told them what I'd found. They said they'd send a cutter, but with the fog, it would take 2 days minimum. They told me to tow the Arctic Dawn back to my station if I could. I did. Took me 5 hours, moving slow through the fog, constantly checking that the damaged hull wasn't taking on too much water. The whole time, I had this feeling, like something was watching me. Like eyes were on me from just beyond the fog. When I finally got back to my station and tied up both boats, the sun was setting. Not that you could tell the fog just got darker, turning from gray to charcoal. I went inside, locked the door, and made myself dinner. Tried to tell myself it was just a weird accident. Equipment failure. The crew probably panicked, took the life raft, and were floating out there waiting for rescue. But I kept thinking about those marks on the hull. Those curved tears that looked too much like bite marks from something impossibly large. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept getting up to check the windows, to make sure my boat was still there, to listen for. What? I didn't know. Around midnight, I heard it for the first time. A sound coming from the water, low and deep, more felt than heard. It vibrated through the floor, through the walls, through my chest, like a whale song, but wrong, too regular, too purposeful. It sounded almost like singing. I told myself it was whales. Had to be whales. Humpbacks sometimes sing at night, their calls traveling for miles underwater. But I'd been listening to whale songs for 13 years, and I'd never heard anything like this. The sound came again around 3 in the morning. I was at the window with binoculars, trying to see through the fog. The water was black and still. Then the sonar started beeping. Something big was moving out there. The screen showed a contact large, maybe 50 feet long, circling my station at a distance of about 200 yards, moving slow, deliberate. I watched the screen for 20 minutes. The contact would circle, then stop, circle, then stop. Like it was studying my station, like it was thinking. Then it dove deep and vanished from the sonar. Morning came with no change in the fog. I radioed the Coast Guard for an update. They said the cutter was still 12 hours out, delayed by rough seas to the south. They'd also started searching for the Arctic Dawn's crew. But so far, nothing. I decided to check the hull damage in daylight, or what passed for daylight in this fog. I put on my work gear and climbed down to where the Arctic Dawn was tied up. The damage looked worse in the gray morning light. I got closer, running my hand along the torn metal. The edges weren't just torn, they were crushed inward, like something had clamped down with enormous pressure. And there was something stuck in one of the tiers. Something white and sharp. I pulled it out carefully. It was a tooth. Or part of one, curved, serrated, about 6 inches long, broken off at the root. My hands started shaking. I knew my marine biology. Great white sharks have teeth about 2 inches long. Even the ancient megalodon, extinct for millions of years, had teeth maybe 7 inches max. This tooth was wrong, too big, too thick, and it was still slightly warm. I took it inside and tried to think rationally. There were giant squid in these waters, creatures that could grow to 40 feet long. They had beaks that could crush bone. Maybe that's what this was, part of a squid beak? But squid don't leave teeth marks. I was still trying to figure it out when the radio crackled. Margaret, this is Dr. Sarah Kim, calling from the Pribilof Research Station. Do you copy? I grabbed the radio. Sarah? Yeah, I copy. What's up? Sarah was a marine biologist I'd worked with a few times. Her station was about 60 miles north of mine. Smart woman, not the type to spook easily. Margaret, something attacked our research buoy last night, destroyed it completely. I've got it on video, but... Her voice trailed off. I don't know what I'm looking at. Can you send me the video? Already did. Check your email. I pulled up my laptop. Internet out here was slow but functional. Via satellite, the video was loading. I could hear Sarah breathing on the other end of the radio. The video started. Underwater camera footage, pretty clear water, the buoy's equipment visible. Normal ocean scene, fish swimming past. Then, at the 5-minute mark, everything changed. The fish scattered, all of them, in every direction, like they were fleeing. Then something moved into frame from the left. It was massive. Dark green, almost black, with skin that seemed to shimmer and change color. I could see part of what looked like a tentacle, thick as a telephone pole, covered in suckers the size of dinner plates. The tentacle wrapped around the buoy's metal frame and squeezed. The frame bent like cardboard. Metal screamed. Then more tentacles appeared, and the whole structure was torn apart in seconds. But just before the camera died, I saw something else. The tentacles pulled back, and for just a moment, I could see part of the body they were attached to. It wasn't shaped like any squid I'd ever seen. The body was elongated, almost humanoid, and there were lights bioluminescent patterns pulsing along its skin in waves. The video cut to black. Margaret? Sarah's voice on the radio. You saw it? Yeah. I saw it. What was that? I didn't answer right away, because I was remembering those old Aleut stories, the ones about creatures that weren't quite animal, weren't quite human, the ones that hunted in fog. I don't know, I finally said, but I found the Arctic dawn drifting yesterday. Empty. Hull damage that looks like it was bitten. Silence on the radio. Then, Margaret, I'm requesting an evacuation. Something's wrong out here. Something's very wrong. The Coast Guard cutter is coming. Should be here by tonight. A sound cut me off. That deep, vibrating hum, but louder now. Much louder. It was coming from right outside my station. Sarah, I have to go. I dropped the radio and ran to the window. The fog had pulled back slightly, and I could see the water. It was moving. Not waves, just movement. Like something massive was rising from below. Then I saw it. A tentacle broke the surface, 50 yards from my station. It rose up, water streaming off skin that shifted colors gray to green to dark purple. The tentacle was enormous, had to be 30 feet long and 3 feet thick. It hung in the air for a moment, twisting slowly, like it was testing the air. Then it slammed down onto the rocks next to my boat with a crack that echoed across the island. I stood frozen at the window. The tentacle dragged across the rocks, leaving a wet trail, then slid back into the water and disappeared. My radio crackled again. Margaret, what's happening? I picked it up with shaking hands. It's here, Sarah. It's right here. The sonar was going crazy, showing multiple contacts surrounding my station. Big ones. Moving in a pattern that didn't make sense. They'd appear, disappear, reappear somewhere else. Like they were teleporting. Or like the sonar couldn't properly track whatever this thing was. I spent the next hour watching the screens, watching the water, trying to stay calm. The Coast Guard cutter was still hours away. I was alone with whatever was out there. The fog rolled back in thicker than ever, and with it came that sound again. That deep humming that felt like it was coming from inside my own head. And under it, almost too quiet to hear, I could make out something else. Singing, words in a language I didn't know, but somehow understood. They were saying, asterisk, come to the water, come down, come home, asterisk. I backed away from the window and turned off all my equipment. The sonar, the radio, everything electronic, because I was starting to understand something terrible. This thing was attracted to sound. The fog pressed against my windows like something solid. Inside my station, with all the equipment off, the only sounds were my breathing and the creak of the building in the wind. I sat in the dark and thought about what I knew. The Arctic Dawn's crew was gone. Sarah's research buoy was destroyed. And something massive was circling my station, something that showed up on sonar one moment and vanished the next, something that left tentacle marks on volcanic rock. I thought about the old stories again. The Alat people who'd lived here for thousands of years had legends about the Kalupalik. They said these creatures lived in deep caves under the ocean. They said the Kalupalik could control weather, create fog to hunt in. They said the creatures sang songs that got into your head, made you walk into the water willingly. I'd always thought they were just stories parents told to keep kids away from dangerous shorelines. But maybe those stories came from something real. Maybe the old people had encountered something and tried to warn their children the only way they knew how. The building shook. Not from wind, from something bumping against the pilings underneath. Something testing to see how strong they were. I had to turn the radio back on, had to call for help. Moving slowly, I switched it on and spoke quietly. Coast Guard, this is Margaret Stormwind at Unimac Station. Emergency situation. Do you copy? Static. Then, Stormwind, this is Coast Guard Cutter Steadfast. We copy. What's your situation? There's something in the water. Something big. It's attacking my station. A pause. Can you describe what you're seeing? How could I describe it? How could I make them understand? Large marine animal, species unknown, multiple tentacles, aggressive behavior. I need immediate evacuation. We're 8 hours out, Stormwind. Current position. The signal broke up, filled with static, then cleared. Heavy seas slowing us down. Can you shelter in place? 8 hours. I'd be dead in 8 hours. Negative. The radio died. Not just static, completely dead. I checked the connections. Everything was fine, but no power was getting to it. I switched to the backup battery. Still nothing. Then I realized, the antenna. Something had torn down my antenna. I was cut off. No radio, no way to call for help. And the Coast Guard thought I was fine, that I was just sheltering from a storm. Outside, that humming sound grew louder. It felt like it was inside my skull now, pressing against the inside of my head. And the words were clearer. Asterisk, come down, come home, we've waited so long. Asterisk. I grabbed my emergency flare gun and knife. If that thing came through my door, I'd, fight a creature the size of a whale with a knife? But I had to try. The building shook again, harder this time. Something was pulling at the pilings. I could hear wood groaning, metal scraping. My station was built to handle storms, but it wasn't built for this. I made a decision. I couldn't stay here. If the creature pulled my station into the ocean, I'd drown. But my boat was still tied up outside. If I could get to it, start the engine, maybe I could outrun this thing. Get far enough away that the Coast Guard could find me. It was a terrible plan, but it was the only plan I had. I put on my survival suit, bright orange, waterproof, built to keep you alive in freezing water. Grabbed my emergency pack, checked the flare gun. 3 flares, not much, but better than nothing. The station shook again. A window cracked. Water started seeping in around the door frame. Now or never. I opened the door and immediately the fog swallowed me. It was so thick I could barely see my hands in front of my face. The humming sound was everywhere now, vibrating through the fog itself. And the singing was louder. Asterisk. Come home, come down, we've been so alone. Asterisk. I felt my way along the railing toward where my boat was tied. 5 steps, 10 steps. The metal was slick with moisture that didn't feel like normal fog. It was warm, almost oily. Something moved in the fog to my left. Something big. I froze. Tried not to breathe. The shape moved past me, just barely visible, a wall of dark flesh, pulsing with faint lights under the skin. It was so close I could have touched it. It kept moving, circling the station, looking for me. I waited until it passed, then moved again. Faster now. I could see my boat, just barely visible through the fog. 20 feet away. 15. The tentacle came out of nowhere. It whipped past my head so close I felt the wind from it, slammed into the station wall with a crack that made the whole building shudder. Then it pulled back into the fog. I ran, jumped into my boat, and frantically untied the ropes. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the knots. Behind me, I heard wood splitting. The station was coming apart. Finally, the last rope came free. I turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. No, not now. I tried again. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch, and that's when I realized this thing was attracted to sound, to engine noise, to sonar pings, to anything mechanical and loud. Every boat that had gone missing, every piece of equipment destroyed, the creature had hunted them by their sound. If I started this engine, I'd be telling it exactly where I was. But if I didn't, I was dead anyway. I turned the key again. This time the engine caught and roared to life. Immediately, the water around my boat exploded. Tentacles erupted from the fog, reaching for me. I slammed the throttle forward and the boat surged ahead. Behind me, my station collapsed into the ocean with a sound like thunder. I drove blind through the fog, compass my only guide, engine screaming. The sonar, still working on battery power, showed contacts all around me. The creature was following. Multiple signatures, or maybe it was one creature so big the sonar couldn't track it as a single object. Then, ahead of me, the fog cleared slightly. I could see open water, maybe 100 yards away. If I could just get there. Something wrapped around my engine. The boat jerked to a stop so fast I was thrown forward. My head hit the wheel. Stars exploded in my vision. When my vision cleared, I looked back. A tentacle thick as my torso had wrapped around the outboard motor. It was pulling the boat backward, dragging me back into the fog. I grabbed the flare gun and fired straight into the tentacle. The flare hit and ignited, burning bright red. The tentacle released immediately, whipping back into the water. I heard a sound, a shriek that was half whale song, half something I can't describe. Pain, anger. The engine was dead now, prop bent from the creature's grip. I was drifting, and the fog was closing in again. That's when I saw it, the full creature. It surfaced 30 yards away, and even through the fog I could see it clearly. It was like a nightmare made real. The body was easily 200 feet long, longer than any whale. The front part looked almost human, with a torso and something like arms, but covered in dark, shifting skin. From the torso came dozens of tentacles, each one as big as a tree trunk. And all across its body, bioluminescent patterns pulsed and swirled lights that seemed to form shapes, almost like symbols. But the worst part was the face. It had a face, not human, but not quite animal either. Large eyes that reflected light like a cat's, and a mouth that opened to show rows of teeth curved, serrated, exactly like the one I'd pulled from the Arctic Dawn's hull. The creature looked at me, directly at me, and I felt something push into my mind. Not words, just feelings. Hunger, loneliness, rage at the noise that filled its ocean, that never stopped, that drove it from the deep places where it had slept for centuries. Then it sang. The sound was so loud I had to cover my ears. It wasn't just noise, it was language, communication, a call that reached into my brain and pulled. Every part of me wanted to jump into the water, to swim down, to let it take me. I bit my tongue hard enough to draw blood. The pain helped, cleared my head just enough to think. This thing wanted silence. It hunted by sound. That's why it destroyed boats, equipment, anything that made noise. So I needed to be silent. The creature dove, and the water went still. But I knew it was still there, circling below, waiting. My boat was dead in the water. No engine, no radio, just me in a metal hull floating on an ocean controlled by something ancient and angry. I looked at what I had. 3 waterproof emergency bags, a knife, 2 more flares, and the knowledge that every piece of modern equipment I owned had painted a target on my back. The Aleut people had survived in these waters for thousands of years. They didn't have engines or sonar or radios. They used kayaks, small, silent boats made of driftwood and sealskin. They paddled instead of using motors. They read the currents and stars instead of GPS. And according to the stories, they knew how to avoid the Kalupalik. They stayed silent. They respected the deep places. They didn't fill the ocean with noise. I couldn't build a kayak, but maybe I could make my boat silent enough to survive. First, I cut the engine completely, disconnected the battery. The sonar died with it, which was terrifying. Now I couldn't see the creature coming. But maybe it couldn't see me either, or hear me, or sense me the way it had before. Then I took everything electronic and threw it overboard. My GPS, my emergency beacon, my backup radio. Every piece of equipment that made sound or emitted signals, all of it went into the water. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than 10 feet now. I sat in the middle of my boat and stayed absolutely still, barely breathing, just listening. The ocean was quiet, really quiet. No engine sounds in the distance, no boat traffic. Even the birds had stopped calling. It was like the world had been emptied of everything except me and the creature. I don't know how long I sat there. An hour. Maybe 2. Time felt strange in that fog. My watch was electronic, so I'd thrown it overboard too. Then I heard something, not the creature's song. Something else, wood bumping against metal. I looked over the side of my boat and nearly screamed. It was a kayak. An old-style Aleut kayak, made of driftwood and stretched sealskin. And inside it, barely visible, was a person. No, not a person. The body was too old, preserved by the cold water. How long had it been floating out here? But there was something in the kayak. A paddle, still intact. Moving slowly, trying not to make any sound, I reached out and pulled the kayak close. The body, I tried not to look at it, was wearing traditional Aleut hunting clothes. There was a pouch around its neck. Inside, I found something wrapped in sealskin. I opened it carefully. It was a carved bone amulet, covered in symbols I didn't recognize. And underneath it, there was something that made my blood run cold. A tooth. Just like the one I'd found in the Arctic Dawn's hull, but older, yellowed with age. This person had encountered the creature. Maybe 100 years ago, maybe more. And they'd survived long enough to preserve this warning. I took the paddle from the kayak and let the rest drift away, whispering a quiet thank you to whoever they'd been. Now I had a way to move. Silently, I started paddling, no destination in mind, just away. Away from where I'd seen the creature. Away from the remains of my station. Into the fog. The paddle moved through water without a sound. My boat, just a hollow metal shell, now barely made a ripple. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like maybe I had a chance. That's when the Coast Guard cutter's horn blasted through the fog. They'd arrived, right on schedule, 8 hours like they'd promised. And they were announcing their presence the way ships always did, with a loud, echoing horn that carried for miles across the water. No. I could see the lights now, cutting through the fog. Big ship, maybe 200 feet long. I could hear their engines, hear their sonar pinging. They were looking for me, trying to be helpful. They had no idea what they'd just called to them. The water around my boat started to move. I could feel it rising from below. All around the Coast Guard cutter, the ocean was bulging upward like something massive was surfacing. I grabbed my last flare and fired it straight up. It burst bright red in the fog, and I screamed, "Turn off your engines! Turn off everything!" But they were too far away. They couldn't hear me over their own noise. The creature exploded from the water. I saw it fully now, in all its horrible size. Tentacles erupted around the Coast Guard cutter, wrapping around the hull like the ship was a toy. The crew were shouting, alarms were blaring, and I could see men on deck scrambling, trying to understand what was attacking them. A tentacle smashed through the bridge window. Another wrapped around the smokestack and pulled. Metal screamed. The cutter was listing to one side, taking on water. I paddled toward them. It was stupid, suicidal, but I couldn't just watch more people die. As I got closer, I could see the creature's face again, rising above the ship. Those huge eyes, that mouth opening to show all those teeth. And I could feel its song pushing into my head. Asterisk, quiet, we need quiet. Make them quiet. Make them stop. Asterisk. It wasn't evil. I realized that now. It was in pain. Centuries of ships, of engines, of sonar constantly pinging through its home. Imagine living in a place where noise never stopped, where every day brought more and more sound until you couldn't think, couldn't rest, couldn't escape. The creature wasn't hunting. It was trying to silence the noise, the only way it knew how. The cutter's guns started firing. Bullets hit the creature's flesh and bounced off like they were hitting rubber. The creature roared that awful sound that made my ears ring and pulled the ship further over. It was going to drag them all under. I was close enough now to see faces on deck. Young Coast Guard crew, terrified, holding on to whatever they could as their ship was torn apart. I did the only thing I could think of. I stood up in my boat, breaking my own rule about silence, and I shouted at the top of my lungs. Kalupalik. The old Aleut word, the word from the stories, the creature's name. It stopped. Just for a moment, it stopped pulling at the ship and turned to look at me. And I started singing. Not the creature's song, but an old Aleut hunting song I'd heard once at a cultural festival. I didn't know all the words, but I knew the melody. A song that had been sung in these waters for thousands of years, long before engines and sonar, back when humans and the ocean creatures had some kind of understanding. The creature released the ship. The tentacles unwrapped and slid back into the water. It turned fully toward me now, and I saw something in those huge eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or memory. I kept singing. My voice was shaking, barely carrying across the water, but I kept going. And slowly, the creature began to sink back under the surface. Just before it disappeared completely, it sang back. Not the hungry song, not the angry song, something else. Something that felt almost like goodbye. Then it was gone. The water went still. The fog began to lift. The Coast Guard cutter was badly damaged but still floating. They got their engines started, limped toward me. I could hear them radioing for help, for backup ships, trying to report what had just happened. They pulled me aboard, wrapped me in blankets, asked a million questions I didn't know how to answer. What was that thing? Where did it go? Will it come back? I didn't know. I still don't know. The official report said rogue waves. Equipment failure, mass hallucination caused by carbon monoxide from a faulty engine in the enclosed bridge. They found explanations for everything that didn't include sea monsters. The Arctic Dawn's crew was never found. Neither were 3 other boats that went missing in the Aleutians that month. The Coast Guard gave me a medal for helping rescue their crew. They offered me counseling for the trauma. They asked if I wanted to transfer to a station closer to civilization, somewhere safer. I said no. I rebuilt my station. Different this time. Solar panels, yes, but I only run equipment when absolutely necessary. I use old techniques now, things I learned from Aleut elders who were happy to teach me once I started asking the right questions. I paddle a kayak more than I use my boat. I read currents instead of GPS. I listen to the ocean instead of sonar. And I study the old stories. Not as legends anymore, but as warnings. As knowledge passed down from people who learned to live alongside things we're only beginning to understand. 3 months after the incident, I got a letter from Sarah Kim. She'd survived, had been evacuated to her mainland station. But she sent me news articles, ships going missing in the Aleutians at twice the normal rate, strange sonar contacts, reports of equipment failures and mysterious damage to underwater cables. The shipping companies blamed it on increased storm activity. But Sarah and I knew better. The creature or creatures, plural maybe, were still out there. And they were getting more aggressive as ocean traffic increased, as noise pollution grew, as the world got louder and louder. Sometimes at night, when the fog rolls in, I can hear that deep humming. That song that's not quite language but somehow is. I don't know if it's the same creature I encountered or others like it. I don't know if they're warning me or threatening me or just existing, trying to live in an ocean that's become too loud for them. I record what I hear, not on electronic equipment on paper with traditional notation. I'm learning the old songs, the ones that might help us communicate instead of just making noise. Because I think that's what this was always about. We filled their home with sound, and they're asking us to stop. Last week, a research team came through. They wanted to set up monitoring equipment, underwater microphones to track whale migration. I told them no, told them this area was too sensitive, that we needed to keep human presence minimal. They thought I was crazy, maybe I am, but they left. Because here's what I learned in that fog. Face to face with something that shouldn't exist. We're not alone in these waters. We never were. And the things that lived here first, the things that have been here longer than we can imagine, they're getting tired of us. The ocean is deep. We've explored maybe 5% of it. That means 95% is still unknown, still full of things we've never seen, never named, never had to face, until they decide to face us. I still love my job, still monitor the seabirds, track the whales, rescue the sea lions, but I do it quietly now, respectfully, because I know what's down there in the deep water, waiting in the fog. And I know that the next time the ships get too loud, the sonar pings too often, the equipment makes too much noise, it will come back. They'll all come back. The old Aleut people knew this. They built their lives around respecting the ocean's mysteries, staying quiet, staying careful. We forgot. We got loud. But I remember now. And every time I paddle out in my kayak, Every time I work in silence, I'm hoping it's enough. That we can find a way to share this ocean without filling it with so much noise that the ancient things have no choice but to silence us. Because they can. I've seen it. I've felt those tentacles strong enough to crush steel, seen those teeth that can bite through metal, heard that song that can pull you right out of your own mind. The fog comes in thick some nights. The water moves in ways that aren't quite natural. And sometimes, if I'm very quiet and very still, I can hear them singing. They're still here. Still watching. Still waiting to see if we've learned anything. I hope we do. Before it's too late, my name is Margaret Stormwind. I'm a park ranger in the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge. And I'm one of the few people who's seen what lives in the deep fog and survived to tell about it. I just hope someone's listening. My name is James Frostwalker, and I've spent 20 years protecting one of the most remote places on Earth. Gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska's Brooks Range, 8 million acres of wilderness where you can walk for weeks without seeing another human being. People think that sounds peaceful. They don't know what silence really means until they've spent a winter up here. I'm 44 now, but I got my start in the military, teaching survival skills to soldiers who needed to operate in the worst conditions imaginable. After 12 years of that, I wanted something different, something real. So, I came north, as far north as you can go and still be a park ranger. Most rangers rotate through stations. I requested to stay year-round. The superintendent thought I was crazy, but he signed off on it. Living alone in the Arctic changes you. The nearest town is Bettles, 250 miles south, and even that's just a handful of people clustered around an airstrip. From November through February, I don't see anyone unless there's an emergency. The supply plane comes once a month if the weather allows. The rest of the time, it's just me, the land, and whatever's out there in the dark. January 1988 was my 20th winter. I'd seen things most people wouldn't believe. The northern lights painting the sky green and purple, wolves hunting caribou across frozen rivers, temperatures so cold your breath freezes before it hits the ground. But I'd never seen anything that made me question reality itself. Not until the archaeologists came. The team arrived in early January, just as the polar night was settling in for its long stay. 6 weeks without sunrise. Dr. Sarah Chen led the Group 3 researchers from the University of Alaska studying ancient Inupiat burial sites. They had all the proper permits, and their project seemed straightforward enough. Document some archaeological features exposed by recent permafrost melting, take samples, map the sites, and get out before the worst of winter hit. I met them at the airstrip on January 8th. The temperature was already 40 below zero, and it was only going to get colder. Mr. Frostwalker? Dr. Chen extended a gloved hand. She was in her 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Thank you for agreeing to guide us. Just Frostwalker, I said. And I'm here to make sure you don't die out there. The Brooks Range doesn't forgive mistakes. Her 2 assistants, David Park and Monica Reeves, looked nervous. Good. People who aren't nervous in the Arctic are people who don't understand the Arctic. We spent the first 3 days at my station while I taught them the basics. How to recognize the early signs of frostbite, what to do if you fall through ice, why you never, ever travel alone. They were smart people, educated, but book knowledge only gets you so far when the wind chill hits 70 below. On the 4th day, we hiked north to the burial site. The location was about 15 miles from my station, in a valley where the Alatna River cut through ancient rock. The permafrost had been melting unevenly there, exposing things that had been frozen for thousands of years. Dr. Chen's preliminary surveys had found evidence of a significant Inupiat burial complex, potentially one of the largest ever discovered this far north. We reached the site just as twilight was fading. In January, we got maybe 3 hours of dim light around midday. The rest was darkness. There, Dr. Chen said, pointing to an area where the ground had collapsed, creating a shallow depression about 30 feet across. Even in the failing light, I could see bones jutting from the frozen earth. Lots of bones. We'll set up base camp here tonight, I said. Start work in the morning. That's when I noticed something odd. The area around the burial site was completely silent. Not unusual, the Arctic is quiet. But this was different. This was the absence of sound. like the land itself was holding its breath. I've spent enough time in the wilderness to trust my instincts. Something about this place felt wrong, but I kept my mouth shut. I'd never been the superstitious type. The Inupiat elders had stories about these old burial grounds, tales of Angakuit, shamans who could animate the dead to protect sacred places. I'd always figured those were just stories parents told children to keep them from disturbing ancestor sites. I was about to learn how wrong I could be. The first morning at the site, Monica noticed the bones. "That's strange," she said, crouching near the edge of the excavation area. "These weren't arranged like this yesterday." I walked over to look. She was right. Several animal bones, caribou, I thought, had been laid out in a perfect circle about 6 feet across. The bones were old, weathered, but they'd definitely been moved recently. You could see the disturbance in the snow. "Probably wolves," David said. "Scavengers rearrange bones all the time. In a perfect geometric pattern?" Monica raised an eyebrow. "It happens," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "Animals can be smarter than we think." Dr. Chen was more interested in the human remains. The burial site was extensive, at least 20 individuals, possibly more, still frozen beneath the surface. The bones showed evidence of careful preparation and ritual arrangement. This had been an important place to someone, a long time ago. The Inupiat believed in showing proper respect to the dead, Dr. Chen explained, as she carefully documented each find. Disturbing burial sites could anger the spirits of ancestors. Some of the elders still won't go near places like this. "Do you believe that?" Monica asked. Dr. Chen smiled. "I believe in showing respect. Whether spirits are real or not, these were people. They deserve dignity. I appreciated that. But respect wasn't going to be enough. Over the next 3 days, more animal bones appeared in patterns around the site. Always overnight. Always in perfect circles or straight lines. We set up motion sensor cameras to catch whatever was moving them. The cameras caught nothing. "Equipment malfunction," David said, checking the battery levels. "The cold must be affecting the sensors." But I'd used those same cameras for years to monitor wildlife. They'd never failed before. On the 4th night, I heard the sounds. I was in my tent, halfway between sleep and waking, when I heard it, a soft clicking noise, rhythmic, like someone tapping sticks together. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click, click. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. The temperature hit me like a wall 50 below, maybe colder. The beam of my light cut through the darkness, reflecting off the snow. Nothing moved. But the clicking continued. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I walked toward the excavation site, my boots crunching in the snow. The clicking grew louder. When I reached the edge of the pit, I stopped. Every animal bone we'd found, dozens of them, had been arranged in a spiral pattern that led down into the center of the excavation. In the middle of the spiral, the human bones Dr. Chen had so carefully documented were standing upright in the frozen earth. Standing, not lying down, standing. My heart pounded. I'd seen a lot of strange things in 20 years. But this was different. This was impossible. The clicking stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else, a faint scraping sound, like bone dragging across stone. It came from inside the excavation. I should have walked away. Every instinct I had screamed at me to go back to my tent, wake the others, and get the hell out of there. But I'm a ranger. It's my job to investigate, to understand, to protect. I climbed down into the pit. The scraping grew louder. My flashlight beam swept across the frozen earth, across scattered bones, across... Something moved in my peripheral vision. I spun around, light dancing wildly. Nothing there, just bones and ice and darkness. But I felt it. A presence. Something watching. When I climbed out of the pit, my hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. I didn't tell the others about what I'd seen or hadn't seen. What would I say? That bones were moving on their own? That something was watching us from the darkness? They'd think the isolation had finally gotten to me. But the next morning, Monica woke up screaming. We found her sitting outside her tent, staring at her hands. Her fingernails had turned completely white, like they'd been drained of blood. "They hurt," she whispered. "My bones hurt." Dr. Chen checked her over. No frostbite, no obvious injury. But Monica kept insisting she could feel something wrong inside her, something pulling at her skeleton. "We should get her to a doctor," David said. I shook my head. The plane isn't scheduled for 2 more weeks. Radio's down, solar flare knocked out communications yesterday. We're on our own. That's when the real terror began. Monica's condition got worse fast. By the second day, she couldn't hold tools. Her fingers had become too brittle. On the third day, her teeth started falling out. Dr. Chen tried everything she could think of. Calcium supplements, painkillers, rest. Nothing helped. It was like Monica's body was mining its own bones for raw material, dissolving them from the inside. This doesn't make medical sense, Dr. Chen said quietly. Bone loss doesn't happen this quickly. Not naturally. What are you saying? David asked. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The animal bone arrangements grew more elaborate. Every morning, we found new patterns, spirals, circles, complex geometric shapes that looked almost like writing, and every morning, more of our metal equipment was damaged. The damage was strange. Metal that should be flexible became brittle in the cold. Ice axes snapped like glass. Tent stakes crumbled when we touched them. Even my knife, a blade I'd carried for 15 years, developed hairline cracks across the steel. It's like something's sucking the strength out of everything, David said, examining his broken compass. Metal, bone. What's next? We found out that night. I woke to the sound of scraping again. This time, I wasn't alone. Dr. Chen was already awake, standing outside her tent with her flashlight. Do you hear it? She whispered. I nodded. Together, we approached the excavation site. What we saw there changed everything. The bones were moving. Not being moved. Moving. On their own. A caribou skeleton, incomplete, missing half its ribs, was crawling along the edge of the pit. It had no muscles, no tendons, nothing to move it. But it moved anyway, dragging itself forward with deliberate purpose. That's not possible, Doctor, Chen said, but her voice had no conviction. The skeleton stopped. Slowly, impossibly, it turned its skull toward us. We ran. Back at the camp, David was awake, standing outside Monica's tent. His face was white. She's gone, he said. I heard sounds, came to check on her, and she's just gone. We searched the area with flashlights, calling her name. The darkness swallowed our voices. And then we found her. Monica was lying in the center of the excavation, surrounded by animal bones arranged in a perfect circle. Her eyes were open, staring at the sky. She wasn't moving. I climbed down, checked for a pulse. She was alive. But something was wrong with her. Her skin felt different, harder, colder than the temperature alone could explain. Monica, I said softly, can you hear me? Her eyes moved to look at me. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. They're building something, using me. I can feel them taking what they need. Who's taking? The collectors. The bone collectors. Then she closed her eyes and wouldn't respond to anything else. We carried her back to camp. Dr. Chen checked her vital signs, weak but stable. Whatever was happening to Monica, she was still alive. For now, we need to leave, David said. Right now. I don't care about the research. I don't care about the schedule. We need to get out of here. I wanted to agree. But I'd spent 20 years in the Arctic. I knew what leaving meant. It's negative 55 degrees, I said. We're 15 miles from my station. No communications, no rescue. If we try to hike out in these conditions, with Monica sick, we'll all die. So what do? I looked toward the excavation site. In the darkness, I could see movement, bones shifting, rearranging, building something I didn't understand. We figure out what it wants, I said, before it takes all of us. That night, Dr. Chen and I stayed up, going through all her research on the burial site. There had to be something, some clue about what we were dealing with. The Inupiat have stories, she said, pulling out a journal. I interviewed elders before coming here. Most wouldn't talk about places like this, but one old woman, she told me about the Angakwi, shamans who could command the dead. I've heard the stories. She said some Angakwi were buried in special ways, with protections to keep their power contained. Bones arranged in specific patterns to anchor their spirits. She said if the patterns were disturbed. Dr. Chen's voice trailed off. The spirits wake up, I finished. She nodded. And they do what they were commanded to do thousands of years ago, protect the burial site from intruders. The scraping sounds outside grew louder. Through the tent wall, I could see shadows moving, impossible shapes that shouldn't exist. So how do we stop it? I asked. Dr. Chen looked at me with frightened eyes. The old woman said, "You can't stop an Angakuk. You can only appease it. Return what was disturbed, show proper respect. And if we can't, then it takes what it needs to rebuild its guardians. It takes our bones." Mourning brought no relief. Monica's condition had deteriorated further. Her bones were now visible through her skin, pressing outward like they were trying to escape. David wasn't much better. He'd developed the same ache, the same calcium-drained brittleness in his skeleton. I could feel it too, a deep, pulling sensation in my bones, like something was slowly extracting the marrow. We were running out of time. "We have to fix this," Dr. Chen said. "Return the bones to their original positions." "Do you remember exactly where every bone was?" I asked. She shook her head. "We documented everything, but the spirits moved pieces before we could map them all. And now," she gestured toward the excavation site, where the bone constructs had grown more complex. "I don't know what's original and what they've built." David groaned from his sleeping bag. "My teeth, I can feel them loosening." The situation was impossible. We couldn't leave, couldn't fix what we'd disturbed, couldn't stop whatever was happening to us. And every hour, the bone collectors grew stronger while we grew weaker. That's when I remembered something my grandmother told me. She'd been Inupiat, one of the few connections I had to that heritage. When I was young, she'd taught me about showing respect to the land and the ancestors. "It's not about perfection," I said slowly. "It's about intention. About showing that we understand what we've done wrong." Dr. Chen looked at me. "What do you mean?" "We can't put everything back exactly right, but we can show respect, we can make offerings, we can ask for forgiveness." "You think that'll work?" "I think it's our only chance." We spent the next hour preparing. Dr. Chen gathered all the human bones we'd disturbed, handling them with reverence. David, despite his pain, helped collect the scattered artifacts. I built a small fire using precious fuel, following the ritual format my grandmother had taught me decades ago. As darkness fell again, that endless polar night darkness, we approached the excavation site. The bone constructs were waiting. There were 5 of them now, fully formed animal skeletons, moving with coordinated intelligence. Caribou, wolf, bear, all watching us with empty eye sockets that somehow conveyed awareness and anger. "I need to go down there," I said. "Into the pit. That's where the Angakuk's remains are." "James, you can't. It has to be me. I'm the one who approved the excavation. I'm responsible." Before anyone could argue, I climbed down. The bone constructs didn't attack. They watched, waiting. At the center of the pit, I found what I was looking for, a skull, ancient and weathered, that radiated a cold power I could feel in my chest. The shaman's remains. I knelt in the frozen earth. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "We didn't understand. We didn't mean disrespect. We were trying to learn, to honor the past, but we did it wrong." The bone constructs moved closer, surrounding me. "I can't fix everything we disturbed. I can't undo what we've done. But I can promise no one else will disturb this place. I'll make sure of it. I'll protect your rest, just like you protected these people in life." The scraping sounds grew louder. The skull seemed to pulse with dim light. "Please," I whispered. "Let them go. Take what you need from me, but let them go." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the bone constructs began to disassemble. Individual bones fell to the earth, no longer animated, no longer threatening. The pressure in my chest eased. The pulling sensation in my bones faded. When I climbed out of the pit, Dr. Chen was crying. "Is it over?" she asked. I nodded. "I think so, but we need to leave. Now, while we still can." David could barely walk, and Monica was unconscious. We made a crude sled from tent poles and sleeping bags and started the 15-mile trek back to my station. It took us 2 days. 2 days of dragging Monica through snow, of supporting David as his weakened bones threatened to snap, of checking behind us to make sure the bone constructs weren't following. They weren't. We'd been released. When we finally reached the station, I radioed for emergency evacuation. The plane came the next morning. Weather had finally cleared. As the pilot loaded Monica and David into the plane, Dr. Chen stood beside me, looking north toward the burial site. "What are you going to tell people?" she asked. "The truth. That the site's too dangerous to excavate. Unstable permafrost, extreme conditions, serious risk to researchers. It'll be off limits. And the real truth? I looked at her. Some places are meant to stay buried. Some guardians are still on duty. She nodded slowly. Thank you for saving us. Thank you for believing me, for being willing to make it right. The plane took off, carrying them south to hospitals and safety. I watched it disappear into the gray sky. My bones still ached. They would for weeks afterward, maybe months. A permanent reminder of how close we'd come to becoming part of the bone collector's guardians. 3 months later, I received a letter from Dr. Chen. Monica and David had recovered, mostly. Both had lost significant bone density and would need treatments for years. Monica's teeth had to be replaced. David would walk with a cane for the rest of his life. But they were alive. Dr. Chen's team had formally recommended that the burial site be permanently closed to archaeological research. The university agreed. Without argument, they'd seen the medical reports, seen what happened to healthy people who spent less than 2 weeks at that location. The official reason was environmental hazards and unstable terrain. The real reason went unspoken. I kept my promise to the Angakuk. I visit the site once a month during the warmer seasons, always alone, always with offerings of respect. I learned proper ceremonies from Inupiat elders, studied the traditions my grandmother had tried to teach me when I was too young to listen. The bone constructs don't appear anymore. But I can feel the presence there, watching, waiting, making sure I keep my word. The strangest part? The site isn't unique. Other rangers have started reporting similar incidents at burial grounds across Alaska. Places where ancient protections still hold power. Places where disturbing the dead brings consequences that modern science can't explain. We've started keeping a list, an unofficial record of sites that should never be excavated, never disturbed. The list grows longer every year. I've got 2 more years before retirement. After that, I don't know what I'll do. Part of me wants to leave the Arctic, to find someplace warm where the darkness doesn't last for months and the dead stay buried. But another part of me knows I can't leave. Someone needs to guard the guardians, to make sure well-meaning scientists don't make the same mistakes we did. Someone needs to remember that not everything in this world follows the rules we think we understand. Last week, a new team of archaeologists requested permits for a burial site near the Noatak River. I denied the request. They appealed to the superintendent, arguing about scientific value and historical importance. I'm meeting with them tomorrow. I'll tell them about permafrost instability, about extreme weather conditions, about the very real dangers of Arctic research. I won't tell them about the bone collectors. Some truths are too dangerous to share. Some warnings wouldn't be believed until it's too late. But I'll make sure they don't go to that site. I'll make sure those ancient graves stay protected. Because I've seen what happens when you disturb the wrong bones. I've felt what it's like to have your skeleton slowly stolen from inside your body. I've looked into the empty eye sockets of creatures that shouldn't be able to move, shouldn't be able to hunt, but do anyway. And I've learned that sometimes the old stories aren't just stories. Sometimes they're warnings. Sometimes the guardians are real, and they never stop watching. My bones still ache on cold nights. I consider it a small price to pay for the lesson. I learned that the Arctic keeps its secrets for good reason, and some things are meant to stay frozen in the dark. My name is Michael Ironbark, and I've spent 18 years protecting some of the most beautiful land in Alaska. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge isn't like other parks. It's raw, endless. During summer, the sun barely sets, and in winter, darkness swallows everything for months. I've always loved it out here, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. People think rangers just walk around looking at animals and telling tourists where to take pictures. That's not my job. I monitor the oil companies. I document when they break the rules. I measure how their drilling affects the land. The tundra up here looks empty, but it's alive in ways most people don't understand. Under your feet, there's permafrost ground that's been frozen for thousands of years. It holds ancient plants, animals, even mammoths. Time itself, locked in ice. I never thought the earth could be angry. That's the kind of thing my grandmother used to talk about when I was little. She was Gwich'in, one of the indigenous people who've lived here forever. She'd tell stories about spirits in the land, about respecting what you can't see. I'd nod and smile, but inside I was thinking about science, geology, facts. The earth doesn't have feelings, it just exists. That was before August 1978. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. I was at the research station, drinking coffee that tasted like mud and filling out paperwork about caribou migration patterns. The radio crackled to life. "Michael, you there?" It was Sarah Chen, one of the helicopter pilots who flew supplies between the drilling sites. "Yeah, what's up? Got a weird one. Drilling crew at Site 7 hasn't checked in for 2 days. Their camp looks abandoned, but all their equipment is still there. Trucks, supplies, everything." I felt a small knot form in my stomach. In the Arctic, people don't just disappear. You follow protocols. You check in. You respect the fact that this place can kill you if you're careless. "I'll head out there," I said. "Give me an hour." Site 7 was about 40 miles east, right at the edge of where drilling was supposed to be allowed. The company, Arctic Petroleum Solutions, had been pushing boundaries lately. They wanted to drill deeper, go farther. I'd written them up 3 times in the past month. I packed my gear, GPS, satellite phone, first aid kit, enough food for 3 days. My partner, Tom Whitaker, met me at the truck. Tom was younger than me, maybe 30, with red hair and freckles that made him look like a kid. But he was smart, careful, and he knew the land. "Think they just forgot to radio in?" he asked as we drove. "Maybe, or equipment failure." But I didn't believe that. Something felt wrong. The sky was too clear, the air too still. Even the birds seemed quiet. When we arrived at Site 7, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Old ice, decay, like when you open a freezer that's been unplugged for weeks. The drilling equipment stood silent, the giant metal towers casting long shadows across the tundra. The crew's trailers were there, doors hanging open, personal items scattered inside coffee cups still on tables, jackets on hooks. Like everyone had stepped out for a minute and never came back. "Michael," Tom's voice was tight. "Look at this." He was standing at the edge of the main drill site, pointing down. I walked over and felt my breath catch. There was a hole, not the kind you drill, this was different. Massive, maybe 30 feet across, with edges that looked melted. The permafrost around it had thawed into strange patterns, almost like geometric shapes, hexagons within hexagons. In August, you get some surface melting, but permafrost, that's supposed to stay frozen year-round. That's why it's called times perma times frost. I knelt at the edge, careful not to get too close. The hole descended into darkness. I could see ice formations inside, twisted into impossible angles, like someone had built a sculpture down there. "That's not natural," Tom said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It's not." I pulled out my ground-penetrating radar unit, a device that sends signals into the earth to map what's below. I'd used it 100 times. Rock, ice, soil, they all show up differently on the screen. I turned it on and pointed it at the hole. The screen went crazy. The readings showed caverns below us, huge open spaces in the permafrost. But that was impossible. I'd surveyed this exact area 6 months ago. It was solid, frozen ground, hundreds of feet deep. You don't just develop underground caverns in permafrost. Not naturally. "We need to call this in," Tom said. I nodded, but I couldn't stop staring at those patterns. The hexagons. They looked deliberate. Designed. That's when I heard it. A low rumble, so deep I felt it more than heard it. It came from below, from inside the earth. The ground beneath my boots trembled slightly. Tom grabbed my arm. "We should go." "Yeah," I said. But I didn't move. I was staring down into that hole, into the darkness, and I could have sworn something was staring back. We drove back to the research station in silence. Tom kept checking the mirrors like something was following us, which was ridiculous. What would follow us? A bear? They don't chase vehicles. But I kept thinking about that smell, that rumbling, those patterns. At the station, I filed a report with the main office in Fairbanks. Industrial accident, possible sinkhole formation, crew missing. By the book. Professional. I didn't mention the patterns or the impossible radar readings. That would sound crazy. The response came back within an hour. Geological survey team being dispatched. Arrive in 48 hours. Maintain observation distance. Do not approach site alone. 2 days. We had to wait 2 days. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandmother's stories. She used to say the earth remembered everything. Every footstep, every wound. When you take without asking, she'd tell me, the land takes back. I'd always thought it was metaphorical, a way of teaching respect. The next morning, Sarah called again. Michael, we've got a problem. Site 4 just reported ground instability. Their eastern drilling platform is tilting. And she paused. They found something under it. What kind of something? They don't know. A cavity. It appeared overnight. Site 4 was 60 miles from Site 7. Too far for the same geological event. Unless... Tom and I loaded the truck and headed out. The drive took 3 hours across rough tundra. When we arrived, the drilling crew was standing around their equipment, looking scared. The platform they'd built for their main drill was leaning at a 15-degree angle, half sunk into the ground. The foreman, a big guy named Ray with a gray beard, walked over to us. I've been drilling in Alaska for 20 years, he said. Never seen anything like this. Ground was solid yesterday. Today, it's like soup. I walked to the platform's edge and looked down. Another hole. Smaller than the one at Site 7, but with the same weird geometry. The same patterns. Anyone hurt? I asked. No, but we pulled everyone back. Whatever's happening underground, it's not safe. I set up the radar again. Same results. Caverns that shouldn't exist. The screen showed spaces below us that looked almost like tunnels. Connecting passages. A network. Michael. Tom's voice had that tight quality again. The temperature. He was right. The air around the hole was freezing. I could see my breath, even though it was August and 60 degrees. The cold was coming from below, rising up like the earth was breathing. I knelt and put my hand near the edge. The permafrost felt warm, not hot, but wrong, like touching something alive. That's when I saw the drilling equipment. Part of the platform had already sunk into the hole, and I could see the metal supports through the ice. Except they weren't hanging naturally. They were suspended in the ice at impossible angles, frozen in midair with nothing supporting them. Like the ice had grown around them deliberately, holding them in place. Ray, I said, when did you last check this platform? Last night, 10 p.m., everything was fine. So in less than 12 hours, the ground had opened up, created a cavity, and frozen drilling equipment into artistic patterns. That wasn't geology, that was something else. The rumbling started again. Deeper this time, longer. The ground trembled under our feet. Ray's crew backed away fast, heading for their vehicles. We're leaving, Ray announced. This site is cursed or haunted or something. I don't care what the company says. I didn't argue. Tom and I retreated to the truck and watched as the crew evacuated. Within an hour, Site 4 was abandoned. As we drove away, I looked back. The hole seemed larger, the patterns more complex, and the frost around the edges had spread, creating spirals and shapes that looked almost like writing. That night, I radioed the main office again. 2 sites compromised. Possible widespread permafrost instability. Recommend full evacuation of drilling operations. The response was bureaucratic nonsense. Geological survey team en route. Maintain observation. Do not cause unnecessary alarm. But it wasn't unnecessary. Something was wrong. The earth itself was changing, responding, moving, and I was starting to understand what my grandmother had tried to tell me. The land does remember. And it was angry. The geological survey team arrived the next morning, 3 people with expensive equipment and confident attitudes. Dr. Lisa Martinez was the lead, a professor from University of Alaska with 20 years of permafrost research. She listened to my report with a patient smile that said she'd heard crazy ranger theories before. Permafrost is complex, she explained, setting up instruments at Site 7. Thermal dynamics, pressure changes, seasonal variations, there are dozens of factors that can cause unusual formations. What about the patterns? I asked. Probably stress fractures. They can form geometric shapes under certain conditions. And the caverns that weren't there 6 months ago? She hesitated. We'll investigate. But Mr. Ironbark, the Earth doesn't change that fast. More likely, our previous surveys missed something. Except I'd done those surveys. I knew what I'd found. Or rather, what hadn't been there. Dr. Martinez's team spent the day taking measurements, drilling core samples, running tests. I watched them work with a growing sense of dread. They were so focused on their instruments that they weren't paying attention to the small things. The way the frost patterns had spread another 10 feet since yesterday. The way the air temperature around the hole dropped 5 degrees every hour. The way the rumbling had started to sound almost like words. By late afternoon, they'd set up a camera rig to lower into the main hole at Site 7. Dr. Martinez wanted to document the cavern structure below. I really think this is a bad idea, Tom said quietly. Noted, Dr. Martinez replied, not looking up from her equipment. They lowered the camera on a cable, watching the feed on a laptop screen. For the first 100 feet, it showed what you'd expect. Ice walls, frozen soil, darkness. Then the camera entered one of the caverns, and everyone went quiet. The space was huge, maybe 40 feet across. The walls weren't rough, they were smooth, carved. The ice had formed into columns and arches, like the inside of a cathedral. And in the center, suspended in crystal-clear ice, was the drilling equipment from the missing crew. Not fallen, not collapsed, suspended, arranged. The metal pipes and tools had been positioned to form a shape. It took me a moment to recognize it. A warning symbol, the universal "Do Not Enter" sign made from industrial equipment and frozen perfectly in place. That's, Dr. Martinez's voice trailed off. Impossible, her assistant finished. The camera kept descending. The cavern went down at least another 100 feet, maybe more, and at the very bottom, just before the feed cut out, I saw something move. Not water, not ice, something else, something dark that shifted and flowed like liquid earth. The camera cable went slack. When they pulled it up, the last 30 feet were missing. Cut. The metal looked sheared, not broken, and the edges were frozen solid. Dr. Martinez stared at the severed cable. Her confident smile was gone. "We need to leave," she said. "Now." We didn't make it. On the drive back to the research station, the ground opened up in front of us. Not gradually, instantly. 1 second, the tundra was solid. The next, there was a 10-foot wide crack splitting the earth. Dr. Martinez slammed on the brakes, and we skidded to a stop inches from the edge. "Back up!" I shouted. She threw the truck in reverse, but the ground behind us was cracking too. Spiderweb fractures spreading out in all directions. In seconds, we were on an island of solid earth surrounded by growing holes. "Out! Everyone out!" I yelled. We grabbed our gear and ran. The truck tilted, one wheel dropping into a newly formed gap. We kept running, jumping over cracks, heading for higher ground. Behind us, I heard the truck groan and then crash as the earth swallowed it. We made it to a small hill and stopped, gasping for breath. Looking back, I saw at least 30 holes had opened up across the tundra. They formed a pattern, a circle around where we'd been, like a trap. "It was waiting for us," Tom said. "It knew we'd come back." "That's not possible," Dr. Martinez insisted, but her voice shook. "Then explain that." I pointed at the holes. "Explain how permafrost suddenly develops caverns in a perfect geometric pattern. Explain how it knew exactly when and where we'd be." She didn't have an answer. We hiked back to the research station, 10 miles on foot. It took 4 hours. The whole way, I felt like we were being watched. The ground beneath our boots felt unstable, unreliable. Every step might be the one that broke through. When we finally reached the station, we found it surrounded by cracks. Thin fractures radiating out from the building like it was the center of a target. "It's isolating us," I said. Inside, we tried calling for help. The satellite phone worked, but the response from Fairbanks was predictable. "Weather is preventing helicopter evacuation. Ground transport will arrive in 36 hours. 36 hours. We had to last a day and a half. That night, the rumbling started again. Constant now, rhythmic. Dr. Martinez's assistant, a young guy named David, put his ear to the floor. "It sounds like breathing," he said. He was right. The earth was breathing beneath us. Slow, deep breaths, inhale, exhale. The building creaked with each cycle. Around midnight, the power went out. Our generator was in a shed 50 feet from the main building. Tom and I went to check it, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The generator was fine. The fuel line had been moved. Not cut, not damaged. Moved. Rerouted into the ground like something had pulled it down into the permafrost. "That's not geological," Tom said unnecessarily. We heard screaming from the building. We ran back to find Dr. Martinez and David staring at the floor. Frost was spreading across the wooden boards, forming words. Clear. Deliberate letters made of ice crystals. Leave. Okay, David said, his voice high and panicked. Okay, we leave. We walk to the nearest settlement. The floor cracked. A thin line, but enough to make everyone jump back. It won't let us, I said quietly. That's what the patterns mean. The circles, the traps. It's not warning us to leave. It's keeping us here. Why? Dr. Martinez asked. I thought about my grandmother's stories. About respect. About taking without asking. About the earth, remembering. Because we owe it, I said. We drilled into it, we took from it. And now it wants something back. More frost formed on the floor. New words. Witness. Witness what? Tom asked. The rumbling intensified. The whole building shook. Through the windows, I saw the ground outside beginning to move. Not cracking, this time flowing. The permafrost was liquefying while staying solid, an impossible contradiction. It flowed upward, forming shapes, columns, walls, structures. In 10 minutes, the permafrost had built a maze around our research station. Walls of ice and frozen earth, 20 feet high, cutting off all escape routes. We were trapped. Dr. Martinez sat down hard, her face pale. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it was. And deep down, in the part of me that remembered my grandmother's voice, I knew we were dealing with something ancient, something that had been sleeping under the ice for thousands of years. Something we'd woken up. The drilling, the disturbance, we'd heard it. And now it was hurting back. The next morning, we found David was gone. His sleeping bag was empty, the front door open. We searched the building, then ventured outside into the maze. The walls of frozen earth rose around us, smooth and cold. The passages twisted and turned, branching off in impossible directions. Tom called David's name, but the only response was the echo of his own voice and that constant, rhythmic rumbling. We found David 30 minutes later, at the center of the maze. He was encased in ice, standing upright, perfectly preserved, his eyes open and staring, frozen mid-scream. But he wasn't dead. I could see his chest moving, slowly, so slowly, one breath every few minutes. "Oh God," Dr. Martinez whispered. "Oh God. Oh God." Tom reached out to touch the ice, and I grabbed his arm. "Don't. It wants us to try. That's how it'll get us too." Around David, the ice was carved with images. I recognized them from my grandmother's stories, symbols of the Gwich'in people. Protection signs, warning signs. And beneath them, scratched into the ice in crude letters, "I'm sorry." He tried to apologize to it, I said. It didn't work. We backed away, returned to the building. Dr. Martinez was in shock, mumbling about thermodynamics and impossible physics. Tom just sat by the window, staring at the maze. I went to my room and found my grandmother's journal. She'd given it to me before she died, filled with stories and drawings. I'd never read it seriously before, just folklore, I'd thought. Superstition. Now I read every word. The stories talked about times Tagwagwa, in times the ones who sleep below. Earth spirits, who existed before humans, who'd gone dormant in the ice when the world changed. They were protectors of the land, but they could be vengeful if disturbed. The stories said they communicated through the earth itself, could shape ice and stone, could trap intruders in frozen tombs. There was one story about a hunter who dug too deep for shelter and awakened something below. The entire tribe had to perform a ceremony to calm it, offerings, songs, promises to protect the land. A ceremony. I showed Tom and Dr. Martinez. This is how we survive. We have to talk to it. Properly. The way my people used to. That's folklore, Dr. Martinez said. But her protest was weak. So is everything that's happened in the last 3 days, I replied. The earth doesn't build mazes. It doesn't write messages. It doesn't breathe. But this one does. Because it's not just earth. It's alive. It's conscious. And it's angry. Tom nodded slowly. What do we need to do? I read through the ceremony descriptions. Offerings of blood to show vulnerability. Songs to show respect. Promises to protect the land. We have to go back to the center of the maze, I said, where David is. That's where it's strongest. That's where it'll hear us. That's suicide, Dr. Martinez said. Maybe. But staying here is definitely death. Look. I pointed to the walls. Frost was spreading across them, geometric patterns growing like crystals. The building was being absorbed into the maze, becoming part of it. It's taking everything. I said. Soon, it'll take us too. Unless we face it. We prepared as the sun set. In the Arctic summer, sunset meant the light dimmed slightly, turned golden. We had maybe an hour before the light would fade to twilight. I cut my palm with my knife, a shallow cut, enough to draw blood. Tom and Dr. Martinez did the same. We were making ourselves vulnerable, showing we understood we'd caused harm. The walk back through the maze was different this time. The walls seemed to shift, to watch us. I could hear voices in the rumbling now, not words, but feelings. Anger, pain, loneliness. This thing beneath the ice had been alone for so long. And then we'd come with our drills and our machines and our violence. When we reached the center, David was still there, still frozen, still taking those impossibly slow breaths. His eyes tracked us as we approached. I saw terror in them, but also pleading. He wanted us to save him. I hoped we could. I knelt on the frozen ground and placed my bleeding hand against it. Tom and Dr. Martinez did the same, forming a circle. I know you can hear me, I said, speaking to the earth. I know you're angry. We hurt you. We drilled into you without asking, without understanding. The rumbling intensified. The ground beneath us started to warm. My grandmother's people knew you were here. I continued. They protected this land for thousands of years. They didn't dig deep. They didn't take more than they needed. They respected you. The maze walls shifted, leaning inward. We were being surrounded. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. We forgot. We got greedy. We thought the earth was just stuff. Resources to extract. We forgot it was alive. More movement. The ice around David began to crack. I promise, I said, my voice stronger now. I will protect this land. I will stop the drilling. I will make sure no one disturbs you again. Please, let us go. Let David go. We understand now. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath my hand began to vibrate. Not the usual rumbling, this was different, intentional, like someone tapping out a message. Images flooded my mind. Not words, but feelings and memories. I saw the earth as it was thousands of years ago, before humans. I saw the first people arriving, living carefully, respectfully. I saw the balance, then I saw the change. The machines, the drilling, the wounds in the earth that never healed. I felt the entity's pain. It wasn't just anger. It was hurt, betrayal. It had trusted that humans would be like the old ones, the careful ones. We'd broken that trust. But underneath the pain, there was something else, hope. A willingness to trust again, if we proved ourselves. The vibrations changed, formed a pattern. I realized it was teaching me, showing me a song. The same song my grandmother used to sing, the protection song for the land. I started to sing it. My voice was rough, unpracticed, but I remembered the words. Tom and Dr. Martinez watched me like I'd lost my mind, but I kept singing. The melody was simple, repetitive. It spoke of respect, of balance, of understanding that we were part of the earth, not separate from it. As I sang, the ice around David began to melt. Slowly, carefully, the frost on the walls receded. The maze started to collapse, not violently, but gently, like it was letting us go. David gasped as the ice released him. He fell forward, and Tom caught him. He was freezing, hypothermic, but alive. Keep singing, Tom said to me. I did. I sang until my voice was hoarse, until the sun dipped toward the horizon. The earth rumbled beneath us, but it was different now. Not threatening, almost approving. When I finally stopped, the maze was gone. We were standing on open tundra again. The holes had closed, leaving only small depressions. The research station stood intact behind us. Is it over? Dr. Martinez asked quietly. I put my hand on the ground one more time. The earth was cool, still, resting. For now, I said, as long as we keep our promise. We carried David back to the station. By morning, the rescue team arrived. They found us exhausted but alive. David suffering from severe frostbite but recovering. I filed my report. Extreme geological instability due to permafrost disruption from drilling operations. Immediate cessation of all drilling activities required for safety. The company fought it, of course. They hired lawyers, consultants, experts who'd never seen what we saw. But I had Dr. Martinez's testimony. Tom's. Even David, once he could speak again, backed me up. 3 months later, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge was declared off-limits to all drilling operations. The sites were abandoned, the equipment removed, the land was protected. I visit sometimes, walking the tundra. I sing my grandmother's song. And sometimes, I feel the earth respond a gentle rumble, a shift in temperature, not threatening anymore, just acknowledging. We reached an understanding, the earth and I. I protect it, and it lets us exist on its surface. A balance, like the old days. That was 47 years ago. I'm 90 now, long retired from the Ranger Service, but I still monitor the news, still watch for signs. Every few years, I hear about similar incidents at drilling sites across Alaska, Canada, Siberia. The permafrost is waking up. Not everywhere, not all at once. But the earth is responding to what we're doing to it. Last month, a drilling operation in northern Russia was abandoned after ground instability. The company reported unusual geological formations. The news showed pictures of the site before they evacuated. I recognized the patterns, the hexagons, the maze-like structures. The entity I encountered wasn't alone. There are others, sleeping beneath the ice all across the Arctic. And as we drill deeper, melt more permafrost, disturb more ancient ground, we're waking them up. Most people don't believe me. They think the refuge was closed because of environmental regulations, political pressure, ordinary conservation. They don't know about David's frostbite scars that still ache when drilling starts nearby. They don't know about Dr. Martinez, who quit geology and became an indigenous rights activist, fighting every new drilling project with the desperation of someone who knows what's at stake. They don't know about Tom, who never went back to the Arctic. He works in Florida now, as far from permafrost as you can get in America. We talk sometimes. He still has nightmares about the breathing. My grandmother was right. The earth does remember. And it's patient, much more patient than we are. But patience has limits. I teach the songs now, to anyone who'll listen. Young rangers, mostly, environmental activists, a few indigenous kids who are rediscovering their heritage. I show them the journal, tell them the stories. Some believe me, some don't. But they learn the songs anyway, just in case. Because one day, the earth might stop being patient. It might stop accepting apologies and promises. And on that day, we'll need everyone who knows how to speak to it properly. The climate is changing. The permafrost is melting faster now. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder what else is locked in that ice. What other ancient things are we about to wake up? I keep my hand on the news reports, on the drilling sites, on the patterns of ground instability. I'm too old to stop new projects myself, but I can warn people. I can teach the songs. I can make sure that when the next awakening happens, someone knows what to do. Last week, I got an email from a young ranger in Prudhoe Bay. She'd found strange patterns in the permafrost near a new drilling site. Hexagons within hexagons. She wanted to know if I'd seen anything like it before. I wrote back immediately, told her about the songs, the offerings, the respect, told her to shut down the site, to protect the land, to remember that we're guests here, not owners. I don't know if she'll listen. I hope she does. Because the earth is waking up. And this time, we might not get another chance to make peace with it. I'm old now. My time is almost done. But before I go, I needed to tell this story. To leave a warning, a guide, a reminder. The earth is alive. It remembers. It feels. And it will protect itself if it must. We just have to decide, are we its partners or its enemies? I've made my choice. I hope you make yours before it's too late. The permafrost is thawing, and something ancient is stirring beneath the ice. Listen to it, respect it, or face what happens when the earth stops being patient. My name is Michael Ironbark, and I've seen what sleeps below. I've felt its anger and its mercy, and I spend every day trying to make sure we never wake it fully. Because if we do, the earth won't just trap a few drillers in ice. It'll reshape the world the way it did before humans existed. And we won't survive that.